Welcome to the Monos Pod, our second episode with Tino and Matt. What's up, Matt?
How's it going? Good to see you.
It's good, man. It's good. Good to see you too. What's going on? You
Going well.
watching
I'm
watching
depressed
the
that
playoffs?
a little bit, not as interested once Seattle got out. And yeah, so I really don't have any emotional investment in any team.
I
And
thought you
but it was
just
nice to see at least two of the underdogs make it in.
the Guardians were the one I wanted to see. I wanted to
Yeah.
see in it, but yeah, seeing Padres and Phillies is super cool.
Yeah, that's the most interesting one. I haven't watched any of the Houston Yankee one.
Houston looks pretty dominant, honestly.
I have good feelings towards Baker. I wouldn't mind seeing him finally get something, but other than that, I'm more interested in the other series.
Right.
And since I own Tatis in fantasy baseball, the longer San Diego goes, the more is knocked off his sentence. So
That's assuming that his latest surgery doesn't
yeah,
prolong his absence, right? Since I traded him to you.
he's getting it all done with.
So this episode, we're going to cover a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about how some of the rule changes in MLB in 2023 may impact the way that we look at prospects coming up from a dynasty value perspective. We're each going to kind of tease our minor league prospect rankings at per position and talk about our top player at each position. Then we're going to, if we have time, we'll dig in a little bit into kind of how we scout individually in the off season, some of the things we look at, how we operate, because I think we all kind of build our own minor league rankings and just dig a little bit deeper because we have time to. And then if we have time, we'll have a little bit of open forum questions as well. So, Matt, the first, I think the biggest rule change that I think of, well, the two biggest rule changes that I think of in MLB next year are the increase in the size of the bases and how that might impact stolen bases. I do think that a potential pitch clock will also impact, and then the amount of times that pitchers are allowed to throw over to first base could potentially impact stolen bases. And then also the impact of the shift rule and having two infielders on each side of second base. Let's start with stolen bases. How do you think that those rule changes will impact how you view prospects coming up to the major leagues next year?
Yeah, first of all, on that subject, that makes me want winter to go by fast because I'm really curious to see how teams are going to strategize here. I think it's going to have significant impact on the number of stolen bases going up, and there's evidence, just data from the minors that has gone up quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Stolen bases have already gone up this year without the rule changes. So I think one of the biggest factors, not just the size of the bases, but is the pitcher throwing over. So it's my understanding a pitcher could step off twice, and a pitcher could actually step off the third time, but they have to get the runner out. So they're really going to have to be assured that they're going to get the runner. Probably won't throw over the third time at all. So that's going to have significant impact. And then I think also the size of the bases, I think there were some minor league reports as far as the injuries going down and base pass injuries. So I think that will significantly impact teams willing to risk their runner, taking off.
Right.
And because there's that injury aspect too, and they don't want their runners going back and forth on the pickoffs.
Right. So you
Yeah.
think about like a player like Jackson Churio, who's pretty much the future of the Brewers at this point in time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Brewers may not, or may be more willing to let someone like him run if they
Mm-hmm.
think that the risk of injury is less with the bigger bases. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's per at bat, correct? That they can throw over twice to first base, but not a third time per at
Yes.
bat.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I was thinking about is all these changes are to create more action on the base paths, more action in general, less three true outcome baseball.
Hmm.
But do you see a specific type of player or benefiting more than another? So when I think about it, I think, okay, so if you had 15 steals last year, you might go up to 25 this year, right? Or
Hmm.
if you have 5 steals this year, you might become a 10 steal player next year.
Hmm.
Is if everyone progresses at the same rate, then it doesn't really provide more value for a specific type of player. Do you think that there is a do really fast guys go from 40 steals to 80 steals? Right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, I
what
kind of see it
type of impact?
so in looking at the minor leagues, there's players that aren't that fast but are excellent base runners,
Sure.
and they're going to get a push up there because they're going to be able to up the numbers compared to the prior MLB. But yeah, I think I see it as exponential as far as what happens to, the top elite speedsters.
So give me an example of a player who you think who you think their value increases relative to the other players at their position because of the stolen base rule changes.
As far as minor leaguers, I think Ruiz is going to be one that's going to be interesting to watch.
That's so predictable.
Yeah, I know it is, but really, the questions still are about his hit. He definitely has better plate discipline. Swinging strike has gone down. Strikeout rate has gone down. Walks have gone up. But he doesn't necessarily hit it hard. So I think his minor league numbers are exaggerated when it comes to hit as they go into MLB. But he's a great base runner and fast.
Mm-hmm.
So I think his value will increase just because he could potentially get be that base running guy that we used to see.
Right.
That isn't necessarily the elite hitter, but is going to give you large amount of steals every time he
So
gets on.
will this change your rankings at all or the way your process at all in terms of how you uh, construct your team?
No, just because I want to wait and see.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's it going to be like? There may be, if you have a team that with guys that steal 15 bases each, that may have huge impact across the board if you have
Mm-hmm.
semi-fast guys. But the big question is, are we going to get former numbers, even just 10 years ago, right? The D Gordons, the Billy Hamiltons,
Sure.
they were getting close. They were in the 60s. I think Hamilton got into the 80s at some point.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to see Vince Coleman, Tim Raines, and Ricky Henderson, but I like to see people get in the 60s again,
Right.
70s and 80s. And so I'm looking for those type of players, but at this point I'm not going to heavily invest because I want to wait and see what's going to happen with the strategies with the teams.
Do you see value in someone investing up front and being at the forefront of that? So say you decide you're going to wait and see, right?
Hmm.
And I decide I'm going to actually take some risks in picking up some guys that I think are going to become much bigger base stealers because of the rule changes. Do you That's not enough for you to shift your perspective or to take some chances on some faster players?
Not at this point.
Okay.
And maybe not into the future unless they're going to have significant impact on other categories. See,
Right.
I think stolen bases is a single category, but I would also say it's not like saves and holds because stolen bases can move into runs and affect other categories as well. But I want to see if that player is gonna is that player going to kill my OPS?
Right.
I'm not going to heavily invest if that's the case. And
Right.
and that was my lesson learned with Hamilton and Gordon, right?
Mhm.
They could help you sneak through the regular season, steal that category all the way throughout. But once you get to the playoffs and it's hyper competitive and OPS matters, they're going to kill you.
Right. So the one, I guess the type of player that, so I'm of the same perspective as you. I think I'm kind of in wait and see. I see all boats kind of rising in this, right? So if, like I said, if you're a 5 steal player, you might become a 10, 15 steal player. If you're the one player that it won't impact is this really, really slow dudes, right? They're still going to be zeros. Um, but the player, like one of the players that really comes to mind for me is like a Zach Veen type, right? So
Hmm.
Zach Veen is putting up these ridiculous stolen base numbers in the minor leagues. And most scouts say Veen's fast, but he's not going to put up 30 steals in the majors, right? He's more of a 30 steals in single A and then 10 steals, 12 steals in the major leagues because he
Hmm.
doesn't have that kind of speed. With these rule changes, I wonder if Veen is actually a 30 steal player because the difference between him being having an impact on the bases in the minors versus majors was a pretty small difference, right? But enough to impact him to bring his value way down. Now with the changes, you're closing that gap, and you may be looking at a superstar if he's actually 25, 30 home run hitter, right?
Hmm.
Um, so for me, it's that type of player that was a borderline speed guy
Hmm.
who now becomes a 30 steal player. That's where you might be able to find some value. I think about Julio as an example. I think he's a great example because he stole 25 bases, but 20 of them were in the first couple of months. And they kind
Hmm.
of shut him down. I think for injury's sake, they kind of shut him down. But if the bases are bigger, there's less risk. And, there's a potential for him to steal 40 or 50 bases. Now he's actually having an impact on the game
Hmm.
and giving the Mariners an offensive advantage by getting into scoring position. So I think it really does impact the marginally fast player much more so than it does anyone else.
Hmm.
Um, Another example for me is Anthony Volpe, right? I'm talking about my own dudes in our league, but Volpe
Hmm.
is, you know, part of me valuing players like him or Tamar Johnson is I know they're not Blazers. I know Volpe is not an 80 speed guy. He's not even a 70 speed guy. He's probably realistically 55 or 60. But
Hmm.
if he has good jumps, the bases are a little bigger, pitchers can't throw over and over again. All of a sudden, you're looking at a power hitting shortstop who could has the potential to steal 40 to 50 bases, right? Termar
Hmm.
goes from 5 to 10 bases to 15 to 25 because
Hmm.
he's a 50 speed guy who is a good baseball player and a high IQ baseball player that gets good jumps. So to me, those are the guys that it really impacts. It's not the Blazers. The Blazers may go from 50 to 70, which is great.
Hmm.
But if you have a team full of 20 steel guys because the rules changed and you found the guys who were marginally fast, I think that's where fantasy wise you can really capitalize on these rule changes.
Hmm. Yeah, and it ups the value of 5 category guys.
Right.
It
Right.
makes them all the more valuable, and that's what, as far as minors, as far as looking for those type of hitters.
Right. I do think it also accentuates the zero steal guys, right?
Hmm.
Because if you can find if the majority of young first basemen, as an example, now can steal 5 to 10 bases, and but a Jose Abreu is getting zero, right?
Hmm.
Now there's a much bigger differentiation. But yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be interesting to see if it changes some of our rankings.
Hmm.
I know for me, again, I think a player like Zach Veen might be elevated slightly, but
Hmm.
it's not going to change Corbin Carroll for me, right? As an
Hmm.
example, I think Carroll's going to steal bases regardless. And the
Hmm.
difference for me, I don't know whether he's a 30 steal guy or a 50 steal guy. And I don't know that these rules change anything until we actually see it play out.
Hmm. And I think some of it matters with head to head as well, because if there's going to be more steals, there's going to be more consistent distribution.
Right.
So I think managers will have more control over stolen bases and strategies of stolen bases going week to week with head to head.
Right.
You know, I don't think there's anything more frustrating when your opponent's catcher steals two bases in head to head in a
Right.
week, right? And that kind of random stuff happens if stolen bases aren't happening as much. But if you get a higher distribution, then you have
I
at least
agree.
more predictability with how they're going to distribute over the course of the year.
Right. Yeah, there's nothing, you're right, because you might be in head to head, and over the course of the week, it's like 2-1 in steals because the other guy has JT Realmuto or Paul Goldschmidt, right? And to me, that's not a whole category shouldn't necessarily be decided on the one steal. But if you if now we're talking about 10 steals versus 8 or 10 steals versus 7, you really do have to build a squad. And it's not about luck because Real Muto happened to run that week. It's a little bit more skill involved for me as you have higher numbers. But yeah, should be really interesting with steals. So the shift. My understanding is 2 infielders need to be on each side of the bag, and they have to be touching the dirt in some form. And they can't, retreat or take off running the minute the pitch is thrown. They have to be, my understanding is they have to be planted. How do you think, how does that impact your evaluation of minor leaguers?
Yeah, this is another one that I'm very curious of how this is going to play out. I think both of us value hitters, right? So my big question there is how much impact is it going to have on hitters who already have control over the whole field, who hit to all fields, right? Because they're not shifted against, right? At least compared to the dead pole hitters or the power hitters. But at the same time, if you get hitters that hit it hard all over the place, I think that's going to have significant impact because they're going to have control over the bat, and they're going to be hitting it hard. There's going to be, they just can't push it through the opposite way, with the shift going on. Not that many players did that,
Right.
but I think the biggest impact will be on players that hit it to all fields and hit it hard to all fields. And the pole hitters will have significant impact too, because obviously they're not going to be, especially the lefties. There's nothing more frustrating than having the lefties hitting it into the shift in right field, right, and getting thrown out in right field. So I think those will be the biggest impacts.
So I always think of Kyle Schwarber when I think of like a left-handed pull hitter. All the infielders on one side of the infield. I actually think it's going to impact the dead pull hitters the most. I think about Francisco Alvarez as a prospect, and he's a 55% pull hitter. And obviously we're talking ground balls, not fly balls. But someone like Alvarez, if you're not able to shift 3 infielders to the left side, I think you see him hit a lot of really hard grounders through the infield. And in my mind, a hitter like that is potentially, not for sure, but potentially goes from a 250 hitter with 25 home runs to maybe he pops some 275 years with 25 home runs now or 30 home runs, which really changes the calculus for him, right? He goes from being probably a top 5 catcher fantasy wise to maybe having some years where he's the number 1 catcher in baseball. And I think that the shift really does change his ability to hit for average. I wonder if we see more, if we might value ground ball hitters a little bit more now, right? Just in general. But specifically when you're looking at minor leaguers, previously we would see a high 40s, low 50s ground ball rate and say, okay, like high average, no power. Can they really hit for power with the ground ball rate like that? Now you got a 50% ground ball rate without the shift. You might be able to have a guy who's going to give you a 315, 320 season because he's able to have a lot more base hits. So yeah, I think that the bat control, all fields, hitting the ball hard thing is definitely a plus. But for me, the dead pull hitter
Mm-hmm.
that hits ground balls is going to have a lot more success. Someone like a Key Brian Hayes, even, right,
Mm-hmm.
who has a low launch angle. Those low launch angle guys, you can't have a bunch of them on your team because they'll kill your power. But we may see a lot more 300 hitters.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that I
Somebody
scout,
like a Hayes with speed too, so ground ball speed is going
right,
to
right.
significant impact there.
So I think that's just something to look at when we're, hitters that we may have immediately dismissed coming
Mm-hmm.
up through the minor leagues because of a high ground ball rate or because they were dead pull. Now I think carry much more value than they may have previously.
Mm-hmm.
Which for me
So
is a lot of
strategy
fun.
wise, so off season strategy wise, would you look for pull hitters who hit it hard, launch angle not as significant, and at the same time have low BABIP?
I don't I don't know that I would seek them. I
Mm-hmm.
think that I wouldn't immediately dismiss them, if that makes sense. So I think Francisco Alvarez is a great example for me, who was a prospect last year who I didn't value a ton, right? Because I saw 55% pull, I saw bad body, he kind of selling out for power, even though he's a good hitter, he's still selling out for power a little bit, really slow, doesn't know how to run, right? Um, so I wonder at 19 if he looks like that, is he gonna hold up as a catcher? Now I could see him catching halftime and DHing halftime and getting more at bats because the Mets see him as a 260 hitter and not a 240 hitter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of players like that for me that I tend to value much more now. Will I seek that profile? Only if the only way I would seek that particular profile is if I see it being ignored or undervalued by other managers.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that I'll be proactive with, but I could see a situation where other managers are still profiling that type of player um as not as a negative asset.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas I might see that there's potential value there because of the rule change.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it'll impact my ratings necessarily though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd be curious just to see the impact on somebody like Schwarber and what he's going to hit next year.
Right. I also think with him, well, it's hard because we don't know if players are going to adjust their approach because of the rule changes either, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Schwarber is is just trying to launch the ball every time. I'll pull it up real quickly, but I'm assuming uh that his fly ball rate is pretty darn high, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so someone like him, is he going to attempt to hit more line drives because of the rule change?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we as fans, how do we actually know what they're going to try to do next year, right? So last year, Schwarber, I just brought it up. Let's see here. Last year, his ground ball rate last year was 31.6%, and his fly ball rate was 47.4%. That
Mm-hmm.
31.6% was the lowest ground ball rate of his entire career. In 21, his ground ball rate was 48.5%.
Mm-hmm.
So he made a noticeable change. His launch angle in 20 was 8.8 degrees, in 21, 15.4, and last year, 19.2. So he's definitely more of an uppercut swing. Whereas when he was coming up, he was advertised as a much better hitter than you thought he was based on his build and his swing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if he goes back to, so he hit 46 home runs this year and hit 218.
Mm-hmm.
Schwarber next year you could hypothesize that he's a 240 hitter, 250 hitter with 35 home runs instead.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I don't know if I would probably value the higher home run, lower average myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just because home runs are harder to come by. I can find hitters to supplement that average or hit category. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how hitters change.
Hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Do you know, is there data on sites on hitters that are shifted and how they perform based on shifts? Or do any
Yes.
MLB teams have that?
Yes, but I don't know where to look for it. I can't say that I've actually gone to look for it before. But yes,
That'd
that
be an
data
interesting study over the winter.
totally. Because I think you can start to find some value in terms of those hitters that have been. I think there is even Savant may have average versus shift, and then average versus. I don't know how they differentiate between what's considered a shift or not shift,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, I think that's a really good. That would be a really good deep rabbit hole to go down
Uh-huh.
for
Because I
sure.
want to see. So what do you think about players that are those that are too good to be victims of the shift, right? So like a Moreno coming up, a great
Sure,
hitter.
sure.
Um, is his value lessened now that he is that these other players may move up a bit, or does he maintain the same value?
Not for me. I think that he a Moreno is I think that we can overreact to a lot of things. A good hitter is a good hitter, right?
Hmm.
And Moreno is going to be a high, like a 280, 290, maybe 300 hitter, whether the shift is allowed or not.
Hmm.
Um, I do think there's potential for, like a Stephen Kwan, right?
Hmm.
Stephen Kwan was an anomaly. He was kind of he was on the extreme because he hit for high average and you could guarantee that he was going to. And so to me, he carried a ton of value this year. But to your
Hmm.
point, if you have more 260, 270, 280 hitters, Kwan is not going to have the same impact on your categories as he did relative to the other players last year. So yeah,
Hmm.
maybe I would think a little bit differently about a high average kind of bat control sort of guy going into 23 because their value is not the difference between their value and a lower average hitter is different now or
Hmm.
smaller. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we will finish this conversation up and then talk about our top prospects at each position.
Okay.
Matt, do you have anything else to add with the rule changes?
I think there may be some issues with positionality and how minor league players come up based upon the shift. You want more rangy players in the infield. I don't think teams are going to get away with the slow second baseman as much as in the past. The Muncy types, even though Muncy isn't too bad, but
Like Curtis Mead?
yeah, Curtis Mead, right? Yeah. So even yeah, so um
So does Mead
even
become like
even
a
current
corner?
players, I think there'll be reconsideration as far as where they're going to go. Like even with a Steer in Cincinnati, right?
Sure. So no Moustakis at second,
Yes, exactly.
right? So prospect wise, that puts just off the top of my head, that puts Curtis Mead at a corner.
Hmm.
That puts Miguel Vargas at a corner, right? Because we
Hmm.
saw Vargas at second when he came up a little bit, but
Hmm.
chances are he's not going to end up there. Um, you could even see a Jackson Holiday if he ends up bulking up, moving off of shortstop, if range is of greater importance. But yeah,
Hmm.
I think it's super. It is something to consider. I also think that it's I don't know. How do I say this? Sometimes we can dig too far and try to anticipate too much. If the dude's a good hitter, the dude's a good hitter, and I don't care all that much what position he plays, right? Like
Hmm.
like a Jordan Walker or Ellie De La Cruz.
Hmm.
Everyone's obsessing over where's Walker going to play, is where's De La Cruz going to play if they've got Arroyo at short coming up and they've got Marte now at third coming up. What's going to happen? I don't care. If he's a great prospect, it doesn't matter to me, right?
They'll
And
find
I
a
don't
spot
know
for
that
him.
even building a dynasty team with backfill in mind is the right approach either, as much as it is just accumulate as much talent as you can and shake it out as it's gonna shake out.
Hmm.
But yeah, I do think it'll impact some players, but not enough for me to think about too much.
Hmm.
All right, so we're gonna go position by position and give our current top dynasty prospect for each position. Um, really what we're doing here is just kind of setting the stage for our deeper dynasty rankings at each position over the offseason. But at first glance, coming out of 2022, the 2022 minor league season, we're just going to give a little insight into kind of who we feel is at the top of each position here. So why don't you start us off at catcher? Who's your number one dynasty catcher?
Well, I'm sure you could predict that. But so Francisco Alvarez, I still have as the number one catcher. I think I think first off, as far as rankings go,
Mm-hmm.
especially on sites that are more MLB oriented, um, I think it's telling that he's still one from the scouts, because he's not much of the catcher, right? So like Adley is defensive, future Gold Glove leader of the team catcher. Like you mentioned with Alvarez, he could be part-time DH, part-time catcher. So he's more of that fantasy catcher as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to the catcher. So I think the sites that do keep in mind, what is this player's WAR going to be? How does he affect the whole of the team? That they're still having him up towards the top is telling as far as his hitting talent. He has a quick bat. I think that came across on when he was called up. I
Mm-hmm.
think it was a typical Mets thing to have his first at bat be against Jansen, who has the funky delivery and what was it, bases loaded. It's like,
Right.
how is he going to time Jansen in his first MLB at bat with the bases loaded where the season's on the line, right? You
Sure.
don't want to put a rookie in that situation, a 20-year-old in that situation. But I think once he relaxed and I think they had him batting two towards the very end. Once
Mm-hmm.
he relaxed and he actually started to use his eye, which is really good. He has a great eye when it comes to the zone. His walk rates have been consistently high, especially for a young player. Once he relaxed, he started to take some walks. I think he only had 15 at bats, but I think he had 3 to 4 walks towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
And then that affected the way he was picky about what he was going to hit in the zone. So he hit that home run that was 108 off the bat. But what I was more impressed with, he hit that line drive double that was also that I think was higher EV than the home run, and it just launched out there and just rocketed off the wall. So
Mm-hmm.
so I appreciate that power there. And what you said about hit, I don't think his pull rate is I think it's more in the under 50. I think it was like 46 in the minors, but still that's not all fields guy, but I think he does have power all fields, just because of his quick swing and the muscle that he has there. So yeah, I would put him at one fantasy wise.
Okay. What is his what does his peak year look like to you?
Um, I think he could be 270 between 30 and 40 home runs, with a high OPS, and batting in the middle of that lineup.
You think he's got 40 home runs in that bat?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Is that as a DH or in AAA, or are we talking about major league catcher?
I'm talking about major league catcher, part-time DH, part-time catcher.
Okay. I guess I don't see, well, a couple things. I don't see that body holding up over time as a catcher. I've got, if you even look at, then this is more of like the scout in me talking, but if you look at how he runs, he's not very athletic, right? He doesn't run like an athlete. He runs um a little bit upright, and I would guess he's 20 speed at this point in time.
Mhm.
Um I know
He's
there's
not a Kirk, right? He's not. I think if you look at if we got his body fat ratio, it'd be pretty stocky.
sure, but I guess there's like being stocky, there's being 5'10", 5'11", 225, and being like, all right, he's big, a big guy, so he's not very fast. And then there's being that same size and not knowing how to run at the same time. Um, but so he's not going to steal any bags. But for me, I think the question is more, I think he'll be between 240 and 260, 270 kind of consistently. I think the question is he going to be 20 to 30 home run hitter or a 30 to 40 home run hitter. And that higher number is going to be what differentiates him and the other catching prospects out there. I just I don't see it myself yet. I also think I get weary when teams are overly aggressive with promotion in terms of age. And yes, there are those like transcendent talents like a Trout or a Griffey or someone like that, where it's like, all right, we just want to see him at 19. But is Alvarez that guy for one? And for two, as many people have said, when you do that with a catcher, right? Because there's so many variables for a catcher to have to account for, you wonder if that player can get overwhelmed. So my bet is that he's not a 40 home run hitter. It's not to say that the talent's not there. I just don't necessarily trust that they've done the right thing by him yet, or that his body will necessarily hold up. For transparency's sake, I have him as third from a dynasty perspective. My number one is Harry Ford. I think that, and I assume that would be your number two.
Yes.
So Harry Ford is 5'10", 200 pounds. He was the Mariners' first round pick a couple years ago. He's 19 years old. Spent the year in Single A, Modesto, California League. 390 at bats. He had 23 doubles, 4 triples, 11 home runs, 23 steals as a catcher. But the big thing with him is he had 88 walks and 115 strikeouts. So his triple slash was 274, 425, 863. So a couple things with Ford. One is that he's advertised when he was drafted as a pretty raw athlete. And someone that was going to have to learn some of the nuances of baseball, catching, hitting. He's shown a tremendous eye, obviously, thus far. That's a skill that I tend to probably overvalue at times, is the ability to walk. But someone like Ford, if he's able to walk and get on base at that kind of clip, is going to provide you with some steals at the catcher position, which is obviously very valuable, and potentially be more of a higher in the order type of hitter. So provide you more runs than your typical catcher that might hit in the 6, 7, 8 hole because of a lack of speed. I'm also beginning to be, knock on wood, believe in the Mariners' ability to develop players, both hitters and pitchers. And I think Ford is next in line as far as that type of development. The other thing with him, fantasy-wise, is this year he caught half the time and DH'd half the time, but he's the type of athlete that coming up, they said may be able to play multiple positions. So there was some talk about second base. There was some talk about center field. And so if you are a believer in that multiple positionality sort of approach in fantasy, then Ford then is further increased in value. If I believe that Alvarez was a 40 home run hitter, as you said, Alvarez would be above Ford for me, because I think Ford will probably top out, maybe if we're lucky, at 25 home runs, but you could see 2020 seasons from him. But it's the all-around skill set. It's the on-base skill, the speed, the multi-position type of player that I think would put him there. Cartaya is the wild card because I think Cartaya has tremendous power. I like his body and approach and organization much better. He's in the Dodgers organization. I would trust him over Alvarez myself, but you wonder where the opportunity comes with Will Smith in front of him. So that's part of why Harry Ford is my number one. And I love a high on base player, regardless of position, a high on base player that has both speed and power.
Yeah, and I think scouts are telling too. It's not hyperbole to say that he's the most athletic catcher that we've seen in ages. So,
right.
And that's key as well as far as him. I have a question for you.
Sure.
One of the comps we often see, and I know we like to deconstruct comps, is the Varsho comp. So can you talk about that? And would you see Varsho being the poor man's Ford? Do you think Ford's gonna exceed what Varsho is doing?
No, I think Varsho I think with Varsho, you're trying to get away with having him play catcher,
Hmm.
right? So if Varsho was indeed a good defensive catcher or an explosive defensive catcher, even, you would see him play a lot more games at catcher for the Diamondbacks. But I
Hmm.
think that he is a good enough bat that they want to get his bat in the lineup, and which is why he was playing in the outfield. I think Ford can develop into a very good defensive catcher with the ability to play other positions at times. And so there's much more value to me, just from a baseball perspective, there's much more value to me in having a catcher who, like Ford, who's good at catcher and you're not trying to hide him. I also think the upside statistically with Ford is much higher than with Varsho. I know Varsho this year, I'm looking at him, 592 plate appearances. He had 27 home runs and 16 steals, which at face
Hmm.
value is very, very good, right? From a counting stat standpoint. His triple slash was, well, he hit 235 with the 302 on base. And he hit 246 the previous year. And then the year before that, in 115 plate appearances, he hit 188. So Varsho's not going to hit for average.
Hmm.
So to me, Ford is another kind of step and a half above Varsho in terms of high end or top end talent. Again, that's not to sneeze at there. His 20-year 25 season for Varsho is not anything to sneeze at with 27 homers and 16 steals. But I
Hmm.
think that Ford is a better all around player with a higher upside.
Hmm.
The one thing Varsho does have going for him is he's left handed. And so he's always going, regardless, he's always going to be a strong side platoon guy.
Hmm.
And Ford is right handed. And so that's a whole nother conversation as to whether you prefer a right or left-handed hitter as a dynasty player. But yes, I think Ford is a better prospect than Varsho ever was.
Hmm.
What do you think?
Oh yeah, and I think just the hit, and I think his athleticism is
Mm-hmm.
off the course compared to Varsho.
Right.
Yeah, so Varsho was kind of the tweener coming up, right? He performed well in minors, but he wasn't that elite prospect. But I think
Right.
Ford has elite written all over him.
All right, first base. I think I know what your answer is, but we're gonna go ahead and move to first base anyways.
Why don't you start? You start I start catcher.
All right. So my number one first base prospect for Dynasty is Tristan Casas. I think that he's kind of the chalk pick. He didn't have a tremendous amount of success coming up to with the Red Sox at the end of this year. His minor league year last year, he hit in the minors. He only had 278 at bats, but he hit 23 doubles, 12 home runs, triple slash of 281, 389, 889. He's had a OPS over 800 in 19, 21, and in 22. Um, it's interesting because he's big, right? He's 6'4", 252, but he's not, and he's a better hitter, I think, than he is power. I don't know that he has 35 home runs in his bat, but I do see a 280, 290 hitter with 25 to 30 home runs in his bat. Um, and he is definitely the Red Sox first baseman of the future. This is more of a pedigree pick for me because the other two that I have on the list are Kyle Manzardo and James Wood. I think James Wood is going to outgrow the outfield eventually. Um, I think Wood has the highest upside of the three. Manzardo is probably the best pure hitter of the three, but Casas has pedigree as a first round pick, and I think the best balance of hit and power of the three for me. Maybe Wood, but Wood is just too young at this point to really put him in that category. The other thing with Casas, he's going to have tremendous opportunity for the next couple of years, right?
Hmm.
There's no Bobby Dalbec to compete with. There's
Hmm.
really not a lot on that team, and I think he's going to get 600 at bats next year, one way or another.
Yeah, he's starting from day one.
Yeah, and so I think we will see, even if he starts slow, they'll stick with them, and to me, he settles in as a, almost like a Jose Abreu type, where
Hmm.
you wish that he had slightly more power, but he's going to be tremendously productive. Probably a middle of the order, 90 run, 100 RBI, 30 home run type hitter. But I do see that from Casas.
Mm-hmm.
Manzardo is, like I said, I think maybe slightly better hit tool, but I don't trust. I've come to not trust Tampa Bay Ray hitters as dynasty players.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also, I know we disagree about this. He's slightly a little bit more of a pop-up to me than Casas is. And so I'm kind of wait and see with Manzardo.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'm going to shock you because I had Casas there as well.
Nice.
And Smurf could testify. I've been trying to trade back for Casas. I traded him for Abrams, but and I won't I don't regret that trade at all. But I like Casas a lot. Yeah. So everything you've said, I think what's interesting about him and looking at what we're learning about the minors and scouting players for dynasty, I think he's the typical player that didn't perform with these outstanding stats in double A, triple A. Like he wasn't the Mervis, star first baseman of the year, right?
Sure.
With AFL, Mervis now has like 41 home runs this year.
Right.
But he has that the elite makeup. He is that, taking the stats away, just looking at the scouting, he is that prototypical first baseman that will be there for 10 years, for at least 10 years for Boston. Whereas like a Mervis is more of that pop-up, right? That has all the stats, but he doesn't have the makeup as far as hard hits, combination of contact and power, the eye that Casas has. So yeah, he's no debate about that. He's my number one first baseman.
Would you put Manzardo at 2?
Yes, I would. But there is that Tampa factor. I don't know. I've been reading a lot in the offseason, seeing if Tampa is going to change their approach with some of these players that are coming up. I even read something that they're thinking of moving Lau to first, which is interesting. But yeah. So you never know with Tampa, right?
Right. Well, and I think honestly, depending on what they think of Manzardo, I don't think moving Lau to first is a bad idea with Brujan and Xavier Edwards and Mead. Edwards and Brujan can go center field, shortstop, second. Mead can be, first, second, third. Manzardo is first and maybe a corner outfield and DH. Like they like that flexibility, obviously. But that's part of why, like in fantasy, it's volume. Pitching and hitting, it's about volume. Are they going to get 600 at bats? Are they going to, get 35 starts? It really, that to me, that's one of the learnings from this year is the more volume you can put out there, the better. And so someone like Manzardo may be a 300 hitter and he may pop 22 home runs. But if it's in 400 at bats, yeah, that's valuable, but it's not the same as the guy who gets 600. So I don't know. I like him as a player. Again, I put James Wood there, and I think Wood has the highest upside of those guys. Pipeline includes players like Tyler Soderstrom, Mark Vientos, who I do not believe in at all, Ivan Melendez, who was a big power hitter from the University of Texas. First base is pretty dark right now, right? There's just not a lot of prospects.
It was funny, like when I first started doing this in the early 2000s, right? It was always the shortstop that was the rare one,
right?
And now it's just flooded with talent,
right? Second base. Let's get through some of these. We'll take a break after we get through some of these, and then come back and finish it up.
I think we agree on second base.
I assume it's Termarr.
Yep.
Yeah.
Why don't you take off with your guy here?
And it's another Julio for me. I love Termarr Johnson. We talked a lot about him and watched a lot of film a couple months before the draft. Termarr Johnson is 5'8". I guess that's being generous calling him 5'8". Pipeline has him 5'7" and 175. He's definitely more like 190, 200. Stocky, Pipeline says Termarr Johnson is 70 hit, 60 power, 50 run. He did steal a couple bags in rookie ball this year, which was encouraging, but he's just man, he's just a hitter, right? And you talked about those hitters that can hit the ball hard to all fields and whether they'll benefit from um, the new shift rules. And I think Tamar is one of those that's going to hit 300 whether you shift him or not, right? He
Hmm.
hits rockets everywhere. His tremendous pop. I think some of the question about Tamar is, again, is he a 25 home run hitter or is he a 35 home run hitter?
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know. I don't really care, honestly. If he's going to hit 300 with 25 home runs and 15 steals at second base for 8 years, he's probably the number one second baseman in Dynasty.
Hmm.
So for me, he's happy to have picked him last year and super, super, super excited about him. Uh, he's almost, I would say he's probably my number two favorite player already behind Julio, which is crazy to say for a player that hasn't been above low A ball, but what can I say? I'm a fan and I'm super excited.
When
Uh,
do you have him coming up?
so the ETA, the kind of consensus ETA is 25. Um, Given the timeline of that the rest of those Pirates prospects, right? Specifically O'Neal Cruz and Henry Davis, it would not surprise me to see him come up at middle or end of 24. Um, Part of what people love about him is his personality and his leadership. And I think those are the types of things that may allow for a player to come up a little earlier, right? The maturity, his ability to handle the media. No stage is too big for him. All of those things have been said about Tamar Johnson. And I think that if you're on the fence about whether to bring him up in 25 or late in 24, he might give a boost to the organization coming up late in 24. So for me, that's um, it's either start the season in 25 as the Pirates starting second baseman or come up late 24 if they're competing at all.
Hmm.
The only other second baseman I have kind of on this list was Michael Bush. I do think Jace Young is going to be a good hitter eventually. I feel bad for him being drafted by the Tigers. The rest of the list is, it's Nick Gonzalez, who we don't really know what to make of anymore, Nick York,
Hmm.
um, Yugi Rosario, those types of players. So the only one, again, that's worth mentioning for me is Michael Bush. I think he's a high on base, 260, 25 home run type of guy in the right situation.
Hmm.
Um, with the Dodgers, you might not see that from him. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Dodgers use him as trade bait in the offseason. But I
Hmm.
will keep an eye on where he ends up. He just
Hmm.
doesn't have the upside of tomorrow.
And he's athletic enough to stick at second base.
Mm-hmm. What do you how do you feel about those two or your top?
I just think it's Johnson and then a deep fall with a lot of question marks. You know,
Mm-hmm.
even with Bush's strikeout rate is scary. You know, the eye helps the walks and and some have said that he gets deep in counts, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
going to affect the K rate as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that shows that maybe the K rate will go down because that's trainable, that's adjustable.
Sure.
But yeah, that's second base is as bad as worse than first for me. And predictability, right? This may change as far as since prospects come up, they kind of just stick people in second base who don't fit elsewhere. But
Right.
are we going to get the true second base prospect again now that there is no shift?
Right.
Um, as far as grooming somebody from the start there.
Right. So based on Fangraphs WAR, this is just to talk about what second base is. And actually, it's a conversation for the future as to how you value these high end second basemen, right? In a draft, either a redraft or dynasty. Fangraphs WAR, which takes into account defense as well, obviously, has there were only 8 second basemen over 3 WAR last year.
Wow.
Um, and some of them were not worth rostering fantasy wise. So Altuve was one. Obviously, Altuve was great. 28 home runs, 103 runs, 18 steals. Andres Jimenez was 2, but Jeff McNeil was 3, right? 9 home runs, 4 steals. He did hit 326. Um, Tommy Edman was 4, 13 home runs, 32 steals. Jake Cronenworth was 5, 17 home runs and 3 steals, but 88 runs, 88 RBIs. Marcus Semien was 6, 724 plate appearances, helped his counting stats. Luis Arise was 7. Arise and McNeil had really similar seasons. DJ LeMahieu was 8th, right? 12 home runs and 4 steals. And then 9th, so just below that 3 WAR threshold, is Tyro Estrada, Gleyber Torres, Brendan Rodgers, Luis Rengifo.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this was, this is not hindsight. This was a part of the thought process for me in drafting Termarr, is knowing that second base is shit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's, even if you go down lower, like you've got Whit Merrifield, who some folks liked as a second baseman, and Ketel Marte way down, who are really underperformed. But the reality is there's not a ton of talent at second.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can get a guy who you think like Termarr, who you think is a 300 hitter with 25 home runs, he's the next Altuve in a lot of ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can count on having Altuve's statistics for 10 years, it's worth the investment. So I think that second base is really interesting. And I do think that's going to be a conversation that we'll have on a major league level for Dynasty during this offseason, is what the hell to do with second baseman.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any more to add with second base?
Nope. And I'm just curious about if players are going to be shifted over there, right? With the, with a Yankee 2 shortstop situation. Are both of them is Volpe going to have second base eligibility? Is he going to man shortstop the whole year, or so his value, which is interesting compared to the past, his value to me would go significantly up if he does get second base eligibility, whether he plays there a lot or not.
Don't say that.
But he'll still maintain shortstop eligibility
for a while, hopefully.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, because he's not incredibly rangy, right? He is one of those shortstops that makes all the plays, and he's athletic, but he's not, he doesn't have 70 range, right? And so he's the kind of player who you could see a team shifting to second, especially if he has any sort of physical ailments at all, right? Or he has any kind of injury worry. Second base is going to be a lot less rigorous on your body than playing shortstop. I'm not sure. I do think that looking for the next guy to shifts to second base there's going to be value if you can hit on that particular player. One selfish major league question for you before we move on. What do you think about Andres Jimenez, kind of his short-term future? Because I know this year was kind of his breakout year. Do you think that this is an anomaly, or do you think that he has the ability to repeat this year?
Yeah, he's an interesting player as far as that goes. His WAR is very influenced by how clutch he is, right? So I'm not as down on him as some maybe, as far as seeing this as a peak year. I can see it continuing, just because he does have the contact. He can hit it hard when he wants to. He has a speed, and the eye is always teachable, especially on a team like the Indians, right? My caution there is his batting position, and I wish, what was he? He was mostly 5, 6, 7,
6 most of the year.
Okay, yeah. So, why? I'm not going to second guess Francona, but I would like to see him moved up and see how he does higher in the order.
Sure.
Yeah, I've always liked him as far as talent, his bat to ball skill. His defense is always going to keep him in the lineup. His leadership is always going to keep him in the lineup. So.
Right.
So I'm not a sell high guy on him. I'm not like a go out and get him guy, but
Sure.
I think he's, for second base, I think he's keepable.
He hit 5th 38 games, 6th 51 games, and 7th 35 games. and he did have carry a 353 BABIP, which is pretty high. But he also ranked in the 94th percentile for sprint speed, and I think part of the BABIP is just that he's fast.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really easy connection to make, but you see that all the time, right? Players that don't hit the ball in the air all the time who are fast are going to usually have higher BABIPs. His ground ball rate was 46%, and his fly ball rate was 32.7%. I kind of like that from a player like him because he is still able to hit some home runs, but he's able to get the ball on the ground enough to
Mm-hmm.
to take advantage of his speed. He's a
And,
player,
and I think the key thing there is if he wants to, right?
right?
So I like players, like I like seeing, you know how we kind of have the soundboard on Savant.
Yep.
I like having players that have control over their own soundboard, right?
Sure.
So he could up the power if he wants. It's going to impact the other parts, but he could up the ground ball rate if he wants, based upon holes and you know how he's batting. And that's why I think Cleveland's so successful, because they teach hitters to hit according to circumstance.
Right.
And that's the type of hitter I want, that has control over their soundboard and can adjust based upon what's going on, not only big picture wise with the season with shifts and so forth, but just bat to bat, at bat to at bat.
Right. I wouldn't be surprised to see him settle in at least versus right-handers in the two hole. I know that Francona likes to go lefty, righty, lefty, which is why he had Rosario hitting second.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you know, having going Juan, Jimenez, Jose Ramirez, if you think Jimenez is that much of a better hitter, might make some sense. The other thing with Jimenez is he did not hit against lefties or play versus lefties very often. Towards the end of the year, he started playing against lefties more, but I'll be interested to see if he does get more plate appearances because they play him against lefties more often next year. But we'll see. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back with third base, shortstop, outfield, and starting pitchers. All right, Matt, third base. Who's your number one third base dynasty prospect?
I have Gunnar Henderson there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think he hits the ball hard. Good plate discipline. Swinging strike has always been solid. At one point he was well under 10 at 8.4. His WRC plus has always been off the boards. He's faster than I thought, which is interesting at third base. He may be one of those players that's affected by, excuse me, the rule change. You know, the concern is the ground ball rate. I think even when he was up in the majors, his launch was what, 2, or it was pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
And there's concerns against lefties as well, as far as the cons here. But and I have a Baltimore bias. I like what Baltimore's doing with their players. I like how they're bringing them up.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to be in a very strong lineup the next 10 years. And I think he has a unique value and skill set for third base compared to other third basemen.
Mm-hmm.
He could help you with the hit. He could help you with the steals. He could help you with decent power, and is always going to have a solid OPS at third.
So what's his high end, his peak season for you?
I could see him between 20 and 30 home runs. He's fast enough to get 20 steals at a peak season. I see him getting a lot of runs. It depends on where he's going to be in the lineup.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's in the heart of that lineup, I'm good with the counting stats with RBIs as well. I don't see him as, you know, like the 130 RBI third baseman, but I could see him in the 90s with runs and RBIs at his peak.
So you're telling me you did not rate Noelvi Marte as a third baseman, is what you're saying then?
I have him as number 2. We texted. I list him as a second base, as third base. Sorry, because of AFL, and it seems like what Cincinnati's doing. But as far as elite prospect talent goes, I would rate Marte ahead of Henderson, but but there's too many ifs right now. I'd like to see what he's going to do in double and triple A.
Mhm.
But and plus he's going to have that park as well. So it's not like other positions we've talked about where you have the one and then great
Right.
separation. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, I have Marte and Henderson 1-2. Marte is my
That's
one.
what I was going to predict.
Yeah, I think my love for Marte is kind of well known at this point in time. I just think he's a I don't it's no knock on Henderson. I think Henderson is a 290 hitter with, 20 plus home runs and some speed, and that offense is going to get better and better. I do wonder about how left and left center impacts offense
Mhm.
in Baltimore. He may be a slightly higher average, slightly lower power because of that. But Marte is just, to me, Marte is a transcendent talent. I think that the way that I spoke about Termar, I put Marte just a half notch below that. Um, I just think he's slept on. I think being a Seattle prospect hurt him. As I've said before, I think repeating a level as a talent like him, he gets bored.
Mm.
And then Cincinnati, if they keep the dimensions of that park, as you said, the same, he's got 35, even 40 home run power in that bat, and he's a hell of an
Mm.
athlete. So to me, he's the higher upside play. I think if you're looking for the safe play at third base, it's Gunnar Henderson, um, or Miguel Vargas even.
Mm.
Uh, but Marte has the highest upside of those guys. Any other third baseman that you want to speak of?
I was going to mention Vargas. And it seems like next year is going to be his year, right? So he's going to have a shot to play every day.
Sure.
And just like Tampa, I'm very curious about what the Dodgers are going to do in off season. If they're going to move on from older players and
Right.
bringing up the youth.
Right.
So I'm curious to see what Vargas does. I've always liked him as a player. Good eye, good contact, good hard hit. So we'll
You
see.
like those?
He's just not that elite player, right? With
You
that
like
elite.
those slow bat non-athlete types? Good bat to ball skills, bad athlete, slow bat. Jose Miranda.
Yeah, yeah.
Those are your guys.
But Miranda's working with Correa over the offseason, no matter where Correa goes, as far
Right.
as offseason getting in shape and so forth. So hopefully that will have some effect. But yeah,
And a new haircut, hopefully. But
yeah.
two other third basemen to note. Well, one's not a third baseman. I did not rate Jordan Walker as a third baseman. I think with Arenado
Mhm.
there, Walker on the
Yeah.
horizon, and his size, I think Walker is going to end up in a corner outfield spot. I could see him ending up at first base eventually as well, but I rated him as an outfielder. The
Mhm.
other one is Cam Collier. Cam Collier really did hit well in rookie ball, and then I think in low A ball as well. He also, if I had a choice between Collier and Gunner at this point in time, I'd probably take Collier. Um, It'll be interesting to see what, obviously Cam Collier 17, just turned, I believe he just turned 18, youngest prospect to be drafted in the first round. He's also in the Cincinnati Reds organization. So with Noelvi Marte moving to third base, obviously Collier, they see him probably 3-4 years out, but it'll be interesting to see how they deal with having those players. But Collier is a bat first, bat second, bat third,
Mhm.
left-handed, great hit tool and great power prospect for the Cincinnati Reds. So again, he would be, if I had to pick between him and Gunnar Henderson, and I had a major league third baseman currently, I'd probably take Collier over him, but we'll see what happens.
Mhm.
Shortstop, who's your top rated dynasty shortstop prospect?
Anthony Volpe. I think we're going to agree on this one. Um, just consistent across the board. I think even though he has that competitive fire, he's a leader. He's very Jeter-esque in that sense. Seeing go from double to triple A, I think he kind of had that elite prospect board in double A, because he
Mhm.
just came in once he moved to triple A, he was just on fire. think that fire reignited. So I wasn't concerned. He had that slow start in Double-A, but that gradually, as he got used to Double-A, that gradually increased as far as his performance. His he's what, 18% K rate, 12% walk rate. Swinging strike is between 7 and 9, which is elite in the minors. He's just a great all-around player. As I said last time, he doesn't necessarily have the standout tool, but he doesn't have a average or below average tool either. So they're all solid tools across the board. I don't think out of all the prospects, there's a surer bet than Volpe.
I appreciate that. He, as the manager that rosters him in our home league, for
The former manager.
transparency, Volpe was a part of a trade at the deadline. I traded away Fernando Tatis Jr. for Volpe and a number of other prospects. So we both have some emotional investment in this ranking. I too have Volpe first. I actually just thought of not more of a statistical comp than a player comp, but he's almost like a Marcus Semien on steroids, right? Because I don't know that he's going to be much more than a 270 hitter. He might pop some years where he's better than 270, but I don't see him going much above that. But he's got 30-30 potential, right? He even has, if the stolen base thing ends up impacting steals, I could see him being a 25-50 type of guy, right? He had 50 steals last year between double and AAA. And he also, his OBP is consistently about 100 points above his average. So if the Yankees decide he's their shortstop and they let him play shortstop, 150 games, and he accumulates 700 plate appearances the way that Semien does, he's going to put up all kinds of counting stats, right? He might hit 250, but he might give you 110 runs and 80 RBIs and 30 home runs and 50 steals. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility for him. But yeah, I'm super excited. I'm an admitted Yankee hater. I try really hard not to roster Yankees, not to roster Ohio State Buckeyes, but the thing that put me over the top with Volpe is that he's half Filipino. And so I had to pull the trigger on the trade, but I'm super excited to see him play. And I do think that there is a possibility that he is the opening day shortstop for the Yankees next year. Who else did you have a short?
Well, we have the typical Meyer, De La Cruz, but he's gonna move off that probably. I like Meyer a lot, but he's probably the shortstop I want to watch the most in the minors coming up. He had some injuries, but he still continued to hit it hard. But I have questions about power, speed, but he may be one of these ball players, great base runner, not high speed, that's going to benefit from the rules, right? Sure. So even he benefited from the rules in the minors, right? He had 17
steals, yeah.
So I like him a lot just because I like hitters. His swinging strike was a little high, 13% more than I expected, but his walk rate was 16%, 25% K rate, hits to all fields. His OPS wasn't above 900, which I would like to see for a superstar, right? Obviously in the minors, but he's just somebody I want to see. There's players like Luciano, who's I think they even just said that he's moving to third base, period, and he said he doesn't mind. Lawler is interesting as well, but I want to see him in Double-A, or full year in Double-A to see if because he kind of has that run up of being that athlete, that great defender, and I want to see if that hit is going to continue.
Sure. So for you, Marcelo over Lawler and Jackson Holiday, is that correct? As of right now?
I haven't, to be honest, I haven't done any deep dives into Holiday yet, so I will be quite curious about how he does this coming year.
Cool. Who's your top outfield prospect?
This is no surprise, Corbin Carroll. I was very satisfied. And I watched most of his games once he came up. His speed is I think it even shocked the people who believed in his speed. So
Sure.
so once his speed could get looked at across the board, everybody has him at 80 now, and we haven't seen that type of 80 speed in a while. I think his power is for real. I don't think it's, consistently 30-30 power, but his power is for real. He's consistent, he was over 600 slug. I think there were only 3 players that were 400 on base plus 600 slug in the minors. His hard hit was right up there with Casas. He's 39% hard hit in the minors. He hits the crap out of the ball. Great eye. One of the things that I did see, he does pull off a little bit. And this may be because of the his move towards more power. So there were some more swinging strikes, even though his swinging strike rate in the minors was 8.5. I just saw a lot of it when he was up, and even the Arizona broadcasters were noting that. But that was more of just him going after the power stroke. It is adjustable. Yeah, so I could see him consistently in a plus 400 on base percentage, plus 500 slug, hitting the gaps. If he plays left field, he'll also, not that this matters in fantasy baseball, but most are going to say he'll be consistent Gold Glover out there. So just a great all-around player, fun to watch. Yeah, and even Arizona, coming through Arizona with the park factors and so forth, that may be a concern with power, but again, the hard hit is consistent across the board, and his WRC plus was outstanding. So, and that takes into consideration park factors.
Mm-hmm. I like Carroll too. He's not my number one. Jordan Walker's my number one. I can't ignore the 40 home run power.
Mm-hmm.
He's not very fast. So, I think there are times where I tend to value the more balanced profile, typically, but I think Walker is I like what you said about Carroll. I agree with. I don't know if I agree with the upside power wise or the on base percentage. I think his OPS might be 900 on occasion, but it's because of doubles and triples more so than the home runs. He's exciting as hell. He is one of the players that has the potential to get to 60 steals, as we talked about. But I think Walker is a plus hit tool, double plus power prospect, right? And those don't come around very often. I think that you have to really trust the St. Louis organization in, as far as their hitter development goes as well. If he popped a 300 average and a 40 home runs in a year, I'm not going to be surprised. He has that kind of talent. So for me, Walker's one, and he's not a 0 on the base paths either. So for me, Walker's one.
He's consistently playing outfield in AFL right now, right?
He is. Ellie De La Cruz is 2 for me. He's not an infielder. His year last year, as great as Corbin Carroll's year was in the minors, De La Cruz was probably the minor league player of the year. His explosiveness is too much to ignore. If Carroll's peak is potential is 30-30, De La Cruz is 40-40. He's that kind of athlete. If I had to choose between the two players currently, right, for my own fantasy team, I would take Corbin Carroll over De La Cruz because he's obviously in the major leagues and has proven that he can do it there. Whereas De La Cruz has big holes in his swing. But if he's able to patch those holes a bit, especially in that park in Cincinnati, he's a superstar. So for me, it's Walker 1, De La Cruz 2, Carroll 3. But all 3 of them, I think, are stars in the making, and with De La Cruz having the lowest floor. And again, if I was choosing between those 3, I think De La Cruz would be 3 for my particular team because of that floor. But super fun. The other outfield prospects that are out there, I think, are a little different because the 3 on that list have such a high ceiling. People make the argument that Jackson Chorio does too. I don't know if he's close enough for us to really know whether
Hmm.
he has that 30-30 potential. Drew Jones hasn't even really swung the bat in the minor leagues yet, so we don't really know. Robert Hassel is more of a high floor prospect as opposed to a high ceiling. Zach Veen is a wild card, right? So I think there are a lot of fun outfield prospects out there, but those three in particular are the ones who I think are have most superstar potential.
Hmm. Now I'm going to be watching Green a lot this year. I'm curious to see how he looks and see if he controls the bat.
Elijah Green,
More
right?
scout said, yeah. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. It's for him it's pure bat to ball, right? If there's too much swing and miss, then he's going to crash down the prospect list. If he actually surprises us with the lower K rate and lower swing and miss, he's going to vault into the top 10 immediately because he has that kind of
Yeah.
athleticism.
Well, he's the best athlete maybe in the past, what, 5, 10 years.
Yeah, son of Eric Green, the former
Yeah.
Pittsburgh Steelers tight end. Kind of cool. Who's your number one starting pitcher?
I have a 1A and 1B. So I have Grayson Rodriguez and Painter as top. And what I look for in a starter is a starter that can control parts of the zone, that can make they obviously have to have the skill set, the MPH, those elite pieces. But I always kind of look at Max of when he came up. He struggled a bit, and but his key point was once he felt like he was in control of pitching like a chess match, right? And he had all the pieces to do that, and
Mhm.
so I'm kind of cautious about keeping prospects that are pitchers, just because it's tough to make that it's just so volatile. It's tough to distinguish between what the top prospect is in a top 10 list and the bottom. But if there are potential elites, that's when my eyes are open and I'm willing to invest. So I see both similar in that sense. I see Painter having higher upside with the fastball, especially the spin he gets on the fastball. I'm curious to see what he's going to do and continue to do in Double-A. But I think his walks to K once he got into Double-A was like 2 walks to 40 Ks,
Mhm.
which is
Ridiculous.
incredible. There's issues with Philadelphia, the park there, but yeah, I think both are definitely going to be those elites. Perez isn't far off. And as we go down the list, it is a pretty solid, Harrison right there as well.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of potential elites in this list. I think more so than last year. And I do have bias with Grayson. So since I do have Adley in the league, I kind of want to see this battery together on my team.
Sure.
So yeah, so those are my two.
Cool. I uh I downgraded Grayson Rodriguez a bit because of his injury this year. Um, I think I want to see from a player like that, I want to see consistent health, especially with a pitcher. Obviously, any pitcher can go down at any moment, but and I disagree a little bit. I don't This has been something I've been thinking about quite a bit and something that I discussed a little bit with Aaron on the Baseball and Coffee podcast, that command for me is, so I want one of the extreme carrying tools, either two elite pitches, right? I don't even care if you can really control the zone. If you can throw a fastball up with spin and a slider down and away, I don't know that you need a whole lot else, right? We've seen Spencer Strider and Hunter Green both really succeed with two pitches, but they're elite double plus pitches, both of them. Or have command like George Kirby, right? Where Kirby's stuff is plus, but not double plus, but his command is such that he is able to throw the ball wherever he wants at any point in time. And so I know that Grayson Rodriguez's stuff is very, very good. but it seems to me when I'm watching him that it's hittable at times, especially the fastball. And so I wonder if he's kind of in that gray area or kind of in the middle where he may not be an elite prospect as much as say a Yuri Perez, whose fastball and changeup are both double plus pitches, and that can carry him until he can really figure out the slider. Painter's my number one. I think that the health and then his ability to succeed at 3 levels last year was huge for me. You know, if he succeeded at one and then fell on his face in the next one, that's one thing that's typical development. But I think his talent is transcendent, right? In that he's able to actually be dominant at 3 levels. The other thing about Painter is he has incredible extension on his fastball. And that's part of why his fastball has been so effective, right? He's 6'7". And so if you think about Logan Gilbert really succeeded with one pitch for a year and a half, right? It's just the 7.2 feet of extension on the fastball is what got him to that place. And so Painter has that same extension, but with better breaking stuff. So Painter for me is number one. I don't love the park, but I think he is that kind of talent. I have Yuri Perez at 2. I'm not as much of a believer as some others, but I saw enough with the changeup, right? To and with that particular the Miami organization, their development of pitchers, I think is really great. So Perez is 2 for me, and then I have Kyle Harrison at 3. I think Harrison is in some ways a left-handed version of Strider and Hunter Green. He doesn't throw as hard, but his ability to throw high spin fastball up in the zone, up and outside to right-handed hitters, and then change their eye level and throw a back foot slider is basically why he was so successful this year. And the San Francisco organization, as we know, is incredible as far as pitching development goes. So he's my number 3, but Painter's my number 1 for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You got any debate with that outside of?
I wouldn't argue with Painter. I would just come back with Grayson. I don't think we've seen a pitcher with potentially,
4+ pitches
or 70 pitches, right? 70 plus pitches. It's again, it's a. I don't care what pitcher it is. It's always going to be a crapshoot, right?
Sure.
Until we actually see them.
See,
Perez, I have a lot of questions about as far as how he got hit at the end of the year.
Sure.
But again, I would agree with what Miami does with their pitchers. Even just how they shifted with Luzardo. The A's threw their hands up, and just after a year and a half, they moved Luzardo into a much better pitcher, giving him the change. What they do with the change is incredible.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm just curious. I want to see some write-ups on what Baltimore has done or changed in the last 5 years.
Sure.
Because what they're doing with both hitters and pitchers, and even their draft selection is and not just the top pick, right? But their draft selections have been quite consistent as well.
Right. So we have a couple more minutes left here. Maybe just walk through real quickly, what does scouting in the off season look like for you with regards to minor leaguers, and how much does that scouting impact your kind of end of season rankings?
Yeah, so I like sites like Prospectus, The Athletic, Baseball America, but I'll mention the first 2 because they bring up a lot of eyes to the ground stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I texted you the Keith Law article in Athletic about his 12 days at the AFL.
Yeah.
I like stuff like that because you actually have a scout there that is telling us about the type of pitches that these hitters are hitting,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a fluke or not, the type of pitches they're missing, and so I like, I think during the season, we're all familiar with the numbers, who's breaking out of the minors, and even some of the metrics. And hopefully we'll get more and more metrics as we move forward,
Mhm.
with Savant moving more towards the minors. But I like that scout's eye.
Mhm.
And I like those, Baseball Prospectus has the eyes to the ground thing. I don't think they're doing it as much. I want them to do it more.
Or
Um,
not.
but I like where we just get one scout's perspective. Hey, I watched this guy for 10 days. Here's our strengths, the weaknesses, here's his swing. And here's the type of pitches he's hitting. Because we
Mhm.
don't see that with minors, and we don't even see that in AFL. Oh, this guy has hit eight home runs in AFL. Well, what type of pitches is he hitting? The pitchers aren't very good in the AFL. So what type of pitchers was he facing?
Sure. Ball
So
carries
so
too.
yeah, so I want that kind of scouting eye in the off season.
It's off season is so we get not bored, but there's time to change your mind over and over again. And I think we see people kind of go up and down with changing their mind, but two, there's also a lot of kind of consensus following, right? Or someone comes up with a cool hypothesis and everyone else jumps on board. And I think for me, it's important to stay true to what I believe in going into the off season
Mhm,
and thinking of it in terms of augmenting instead of changing, right?
mhm,
So I'll take I believe in aggregate or like composite rankings. And so I'll put together a bunch of sites, like you said, Baseball America, whoever it is, the prospect sites that I trust, and kind of get a rough idea as to where a prospect lands, and then start to dig in a little bit more on not the prospects that where there's a lot of agreement as much as the prospects that where there's a lot of variance, right? Or someone who's really, really interesting to me. So an example would have been like Jackson Churio last year, right? He was on the ascent pretty early. And I think he's someone that if we would have dug a little bit deeper in the offseason, would have realized that's where he was headed.
mhm,
But for me, it's like I think of like Tink Hence is a great example who's of a pitcher who's going to be at the bottom of a lot of top 100 lists going into this offseason, but could be the next Andrew Painter or Kyle Harrison by the end of 23. And so,
mhm,
what kind of can I watch some of his starts or some of his innings to get a feel for who he really is and start to buy Tink Hence stock, right?
mhm,
Um, but for me, mostly what it is in the off season is just watching video. It's picking up some players and watching video of them, whether it's you know last year during games or on the backfields or whatever it might be, to get a better feel for who that player is, and then
mhm,
making decisions based on that video. The other thing to take into consideration is um, players that are closer to MLB, just watching roster movement, right,
mhm,
on those particular teams, because it'll say a lot about whether that organization is ready for that player to come up or not. Like watching what happens in the corner outfield in St. Louis, right?
mhm,
Are they going to, and listening to the chatter, is Goldschmidt going to DH more? Are they going to sign a big corner outfielder, or are they just going to bring Walker up and let him play?
mhm,
Um, but again, from a baseline perspective, it's knowing what I know about prospects and not forgetting about all the work that we've done heading into the off
mhm,
season, and adding to it or augmenting it as opposed to completely changing your perspective on a player. Because I think
mhm,
people tend to follow consensus or the next cool new opinion as
mhm,
opposed to sticking to what they actually believe.
mhm. Yeah, and that's a great point about hype, because that's when the hype enters, is in the winter.
Right. Well, because we don't have anything better to do, or because, fact of the matter is a lot of these sites are their businesses, right? And so they have to
Mhm,
create some sort of excitement or chatter in order to sell
mhm,
ads. And
mhm,
so how much of that is sorting through that and saying how much of this is to create more buzz and how much do they actually believe?
mhm. And I think evaluating the sites as well is helpful too. That it's interesting that I have the sites marked down that had identified Harrison last winter,
Right.
or were really high on De La Cruz,
Right.
um or you know prospects that they were low on that ended up being bad.
Right. Well,
Prospects that were hyped, yeah.
think about like if I look at my own top prospect rankings, I value balance, right? And I always have room for one or two players that are extreme in one category because I think they can help. But I know myself, I try to construct teams that with players with double digit steals and double digit homers and a good OPS at each position. To me, that's the way to win a championship, because one player falling off or getting hurt is not going to destroy your team. When I look at my rankings, I've got Harry Ford, I've got Termarr Johnson, I've got Noelvi Marte, Anthony Volpe, Jordan Walker. These are all guys who are not just one category. And I think that's
you're gonna have to trade for Harry Ford.
I might, but for me, like it's if I built a website, that would be what people would say about the website is, I know that this, from a fantasy perspective, this website values balance and is not necessarily going to value the 80 power in the way that somebody else might. Yeah, super fun and interesting. This is our top prospects at each position is just a taste of what's to come as far as our prospect rankings here in the off season.
And now we're on public record about about these prospects.
That's right. That's right.
I'm not going to evaluate it next year, right?
Right. Totally. Anything else to add?
Not much. No, I want winter to go by fast. I want catchers to report. I'm not big on the NFL right now. So
right. Sorry about the Browns.
Yeah, that's a big reason.
Are you rooting for any team in the last four in MLB?
Oh yeah, I want San Diego to go 7 games and then 7 games to get Tatis down into the April 15s in the April teens when he returns.
I saw a video of him rubbing some cream on his wrist. I don't know if that's a bad thing or not.
But and I would like to see Baker win. I like Baker, but I don't want to see Houston win. So that's kind of a mixed bag there. So
right, I think I'm more of a anti AL at this point in time than I am anything else. Whoever comes out of the NL, I'll be rooting for sure.
I like to see Harper. I like Harper a lot. I still,
me too.
Being that fan, I always liked him even when he went to Philly. So
me too.
I wouldn't mind.
Man, it was good catching up.
All right,
catch up soon.
All right.